You know your rights? Okay, go for it. Posted by Yin 1969. Background. My ex and I were 3 months into separation as I kept suggesting divorce agreements, trying to find what she would accept other than take her back and return to being a doormat for her. I have a good head for legal documents, and I understood very early that, as much as I would prefer to just burn everything down and disappear, legally, it was very likely I was going to be paying alimony, and she was entitled to a fair share of everything. But in a no-fault state with no gender preferences, it did mean a fair share. It was clear that legally I would not get an approval for an agreement heavily biased in her favor. So I kept reworking and sending possible divisions, every few days for months. She would object to anything that put any responsibility on her, anything that left something of value out of her hands. Anytime I asked her what terms she would be okay with, she would just derail the conversation to something else. Not long into this, I realized that I would need a paper trail, so everything went to email only. Through all of this, I had recognized too that a court would order spousal support, so there wasn't any point in just cutting her off financially. Not a total doormat at this point though. I had moved my direct deposit to a solo account and kept up her weekly cash flow and kept paying her bills. But my final offer in this period was the heavily unbalanced offer of splitting the cars, one to each, me taking all the debt, including her student loans, paying her $3,000 to $4,000 a month for a year so she could get her feet under her, and she gets all the stuff. I walk away with my car, my dogs, some tools, and some clothes. No go. Not good enough for her. And so we get to the meat of the story for the malicious compliance. 3 months in, I finally get her to agree to a mediator since I'm getting nowhere. She shows up to the initial meeting, the first time we have seen each other in a while, the second time since splitting. She was staying with her sister. The mediator starts out with the rules of mediation and the agreements to sign. I sign easily. She balks, but signs it finally. One of the relevant terms is that we agree to not file any other legal paperwork. We would come to an agreement and the mediator would file the final court papers on both of our behalf to get the divorce ordered. The mediator starts asking basic questions, and every question to either of us results in my ex launching into an irrelevant topic attempting emotional manipulation of me or him. I quickly resolve to gray rock her directly and only direct my interactions to the mediator. I do my best to ignore her off-topic ramblings and reply to the mediator when she briefly crossed relevancy, like someone falling from a tree and briefly being stopped by various branches on the way down. The peak was when she literally crawled on top of the big table to stick her face in mine to force me to see her and engage in her ranting. The mediator called it quits at that point. He reminded her of the rules she agreed to, gave us homework to fill out, and had us schedule the next meeting with his clerk, 2 weeks out. 3 days later, I get served with a summons to court for a hearing over spousal support. The summons shows the claim my ex made that all I had received from her in 3 months was $130. Oh boy, not true at all, not to mention in violation of the mediator terms. I end up on a conference call with the ex and the mediator as he tells her that she needs to withdraw the complaint or mediation can't continue. She adamantly insists that she knows her rights. So the mediator ends his involvement, cuts us refund checks minus time worked so far, and exits stage left. I prepare for the hearing. I print out 3 months of bank statements and highlight every transfer to her, every bill paid on her behalf, every ATM withdrawal by her card, over 100 toll bills I received from her just driving through express lane tolls, so I got the elevated license plate fee mailed to me. $13,000 in change. You missed a couple zeros in your complaint, I thought. My final stack of paper was rather thick, so I made and printed an Excel spreadsheet summary for the cover sheet. I also looked up the spousal support rules again. It is 40% of the difference between the income goes from the higher paid to the lower paid. Some little wiggle room, but that's it. Simple. She was currently getting up to 72% of my pay once you factored her bills in. This court hearing was a good thing. Not as good as a mediator and fast resolution, but I wasn't likely to end up screwed more here. Not to mention, I had some daydreams of her finding out what lying on court documents might do. Court date rolls around. I show up to court, waiting in the hall outside the family law section. She shows up and plops herself next to me to start going off on me again. I try to ignore her, and then to keep from engaging, I start a written transcript of her ranting using the back cover of my paperwork folder. Finally, she realized what I'm doing and ends the ranting with, "Oh, I guess you're writing what I'm saying so you can make your friends hate me." They needed no encouragement. She huffs a few seats away and is quiet the rest of the time we waited. The court officer, not a judge, just someone authorized to handle it since it's a simple and clear legal process, finally comes to get us, and we head in. The officer starts the legal speeches, yada yada, and then asks my ex if she has anything to add to the complaint. She launches into a roller coaster speech proclaiming all my bad faults, some of which were real, and how mean I was to try and divorce her, and how I obviously didn't need any of the money I made because he is just going to live somewhere simple and cheap anyway. Yeah, her words. The court officer returns to the present like someone climbing down from the kitchen table after seeing a rat run by, and she asks me if I have anything I'd like to say. She can see the stack of paper and eyeballs it as she is talking. I hand over the stack, tell the officer that the summary sheet on top should help clear up the financial points in question, and just verbally start going through the items. At each one, my ex interrupts to give a reason why that item shouldn't count. Every single one. The officer keeps asking her to stop interrupting, but to no avail. We finally finish the list. The officer is shaking her head slightly and says, "Mr. Yin, this court process is to ensure that both parties are doing the right thing, so all of the," and gestures to encompass the stack of paper, "needs to stop right now. We will garnish your paychecks for the amount specified by law and send that to her instead." I know it's a win. I knew it was going to be. She didn't. She sat there all smug as we get into the calculations. I asked for a couple of adjustments to keep the amount of her car payment since I co-signed, and I wanted to be sure that the bill was paid. I expected that she would refuse or overspend on other stuff and be unable to pay it. I didn't want to give her the power to trash my credit. The officer agreed. I then asked to keep the insurance payment amount too for much the same reason, also agreed by the officer. My ex continued to be smug. I know she was thrilled at the idea of getting a court check directly. It sure would show me. Everything wrapped up. We got the totals, signed papers, and I handed over a check for the first payment, and the officer got up to make copies of everything. I asked the officer if I could wait in another room while she did, and got an agreement with a bit of side-eye at my ex. I got my paperwork first, with the officer saying it might take a few minutes for her to get her paperwork, but you're free to go. I got the hint and left immediately. I had parked a few streets away anyway, another barrier if she couldn't park near me. I got in my car and immediately called my cell carrier and canceled her phone. Does she want to set up her own plan? I can't answer that. I'm obeying a court order to remove her from my accounts. Okay. And worked down the remaining subscriptions I was paying for that she used. I even had the bills in front of me from court with account numbers and customer service numbers right there. I was done and driving home when she started blowing up my phone with incoming emails demanding to know what I was doing. Then texts from her sister's phone. Then calls. I just grinned and didn't answer any of them. She stopped after an hour or so and gave me a few hours of silence. Then an all-caps email with a screenshot of the Netflix inactive account message. Oh my gosh, even Netflix! I admit, I giggled. The fallout wasn't over though. A month later, after she realized how much less she has from me after winning her case, she files an appeal. It is denied due to lack of reason. A month later, she files a complaint that I wasn't paying her car payment, just an excuse to get into court. I had been paying it, and I was also pretty confident that, even if I hadn't, she didn't know how to get into that loan's account. She legally could, just never had cared to learn how. I had a lawyer at this point, and we both go to court. She is going to join by phone. The officer paused before calling and tells my lawyer, "This lady is a piece of work." The validation of that statement will always remain with me. The call goes predictably. My ex makes irrelevant rants. The officer keeps shutting her down and finally asks my ex for proof that I wasn't paying the car payment. And as she is holding statements and check images proving I had. My ex nearly screams, "I just know he isn't, so he can hurt me." The officer replies, "I am holding proof that he has paid it and is satisfying his legal obligation. The complaint is dismissed. Thank you," and hangs up on my ex. Divorce took another 10 months, lots more crazy, teaches her newbie lawyer a hard lesson, and I walked away with even less alimony than the spousal support and only about 60% of the debt. I lost my dogs to her though, my only regret in the outcome. One is certainly past old age limits now, the other is in that range. I still miss them. See, I think this is great malicious compliance because it is a purely great example of the OP sticking to the book, knowing everything to the letter, I's dotted, T's crossed, knowing that I can bring this argument and it will support and stand on here, and she was just going in blind, angrily letting that madness and anger be her judge and guide, not the pure, cool-headed, clear thoughts of OP. Way to go, man. Heavy Metal Finance by Sino. Quite a few years ago now, in the late 1990s and very early on in my career, I used to work for a company that helped customers of certain retail stores manage their finances. My role was a sort of compliance officer, ensuring that the staff who dealt with customers were following the rules. If they messed it up, it was a big problem and could potentially impact the customer's credit score, result in them defaulting on payments, and even end up in court. I took my job pretty seriously. The company was not particularly well run from a management perspective. They'd made a lot of money very quickly and had grown from a handful of people in a garage to a 4-story building in the CBD within the space of a year and a half. There wasn't a great deal in the way of policy or process framework, so I had to develop a lot of the tools to do the job myself. This involved some programming, a basic system to track what I was doing, link to the extensive rule set, and automate some of the more tedious reporting. It would also track how long I was spending on each task so that I could see about which elements I could streamline. Now, I was quite proud of this system and called it Hendrix, as I'm a massive Jimi Hendrix fan, and it used to play about 5 seconds of the instrumental version of Little Wing when it started up. As I had my own little room, cupboard, this never used to annoy anyone. I can geek out about that type of stuff. At this point, before corporate IT became rather more rigid, I used to write a lot of my own tools. I was the only person who was using Hendrix, and it was just a tool for me. My manager, the archetypal middle manager, decided that because it allowed you to quickly reference which rules applied to which situation, it should be rolled out to all staff. Now, I had previously considered this, but I argued that I couldn't guarantee that it would be fit for task because I designed it for my own use, and I'd need to make some changes first. But he rolled it out anyway, without me even getting a chance to tweak it. He got a Team Player of the Week award for introducing a tool to make life easier for frontline staff. In his acceptance speech, this was a big rah-rah thing each week for the company, he thanked his manager. I didn't even get a mention. Then, 2 weeks later, he realized that I'd been recording how long I had been working on certain tasks within the program. Now, I'd realized fairly quickly that this part of the program was a little too detailed, and I didn't really care too much about every single task within each incident. So, I just used it to record how long I spent on the entire incident, rather than each part of the incident. My manager invited me to a meeting about Hendrix, no details given, and I attended thinking it was going to be a list of requested features, only to find out that the head of HR was there, and I was being given a written warning for falsifying timekeeping. Because each customer interaction was a certain length, my manager had decided that this was what I should be recording, and not how long I was spending listening to, analyzing, checking, and reporting on the interaction. Remember, this is a tool that I had designed for my own use, and it was not being used to calculate how much I was being paid or whether I was doing enough work during the day or not. There was nothing in place for that at all. I had not made the records public. He'd found them in a file on the server that only he and I had access to. Nobody else was supposed to even have this tool. I argued this and was told that it wasn't up to me, and I was getting a warning regardless. It got really quite heated and unpleasant, though I got the impression that the head of HR was a little embarrassed about the whole thing. They said, however, that if I wanted to consult a lawyer, I was quite within my rights to do so. It was at this point that I was rather smugly able to state that I could get 2 lawyers there within the hour, as both my parents were practicing, and my mother was, in point of fact, an employment lawyer. I realize this is a bit of a deus ex machina, but it only has a partial bearing on the story. Suddenly, there was a completely different attitude from my manager. There was an attempt to roll back the issue and turn it into a suggestion that perhaps I should be a bit more careful with my timekeeping in the future. But I was pretty angry at this point. I pointed out that my software had been rolled out to all staff against my wishes. I was told that this wasn't up to me, as it was company intellectual property, until I advised them that I had written it in my own time, at home on my own computer. It was plugging into the official government rule set and not the corporate intranet one. I had not confirmed it fit for general release at all. I had received special dispensation from IT to install it on a single work computer, mine, and I would require them to pay a license fee for anything beyond this. Now, to be fair, this would have been tied up in court for a long time, and I've got no idea whether I'd been successful, so in the end, I relented. If they wanted to use Hendrix, well, I guess they could. I just made sure that Little Wing would play for 1 second longer on startup for every week the software was in use. Then I quit the following Monday and was working for another company by the Monday after that. 3 or 4 months later, I got a phone call from my former manager asking to come fix the problems with my software. He hung up when I quoted him my consultant fees. I don't know why IT weren't able to figure it out. It was just a setting in a text file, not at all hard to find. A friend who remained in the company tells me that they continued to use Hendrix for a whole year. The mornings in the call center were apparently horrifying, with Little Wing playing for around a minute every time someone started a new shift. Sometimes it would play on 20 computers at once, a few seconds apart, on tinny PC speakers that they were unable, due to IT, to mute. See, I really like this story because I'm a rock and roll guy myself, and this is malicious compliance that is just fun, right? It plays for 1 second longer every time, and that is just so hilarious because as it's on the machine longer, it's more and more, but it's little by little, 1 second here and there. You're not going to notice it, right? Until it's like a year later and it's just blaring. It's perfect because it's so fun, right? It's a rock and roll song, 1 second longer each time. It's just a fun malicious compliance. Way to go, OP. Bad boss is going on a power trip. Watch how I take him down. Click the next video on your screen so you don't miss this awesome story, and I'll see you there.